After poking around with certain sound settings and wrangling to try to get what we can, we are back with 2MK Sandbag Casuals XL. Genius has prevailed. We still haven't quite worked out how loud the game should be, but we had that problem last time too. Even at 20% it still gets kind of weird. Maybe we can poke at it a little bit now, I think, because it is in-game, so while we're waiting for matches, let's try that. I think the sound settings can be pulled from here. In any case, we are, for the first time, having Cosmic Wolf play this game. As with our standard Sandbag Casuals XL segments... Oh, we do have to go all the way back up. Well, let's do that. Right, match menu, and out we go. Down by 1 tick each. And we'll hope that that is enough because it don't go no lower. But we're returning to network matches. Now, as always, our Sandbag Casuals XL segments are basically about doing nothing in particular. And seeing what we can figure out or not figure out about our characters. In this case, we're relatively confident that Cosmic Wolf does play Hilda in this game. And starting off with Ori basically so that, first of all, Omni Rabbit can see what the CPU thinks of this, and possibly give some advice, even though that advice would then have to be relayed. But here's already our first challenger. So, having literally never played this game before, you shouldn't expect much, but it's the learning experience that goes with it. Plus, zoning instincts are still zoning instincts. At the end of the day, keeping your opponent away from you is a matter of understanding space between you. And Cosmic Wolf is not exactly a stranger to zoning anime style games, even though this is no air dashes and a bit more like Street Fighter in general, as we've mentioned previously. Before he began anything, I warned him that the main problem with this game is that if you can't anti-air, you're just gonna get beat up for a bit. It's very hard to get your turn in Under Night as a beginner without understanding either how to get away from your opponent with the invincible backdashes that we've often mentioned, or anti-air really well. Hilda is a good zoner, and therefore once she's relatively far away, she can anti-air with bigger specials and just aim them at the proper part of the screen, similar to how Axel can. Supers also have useful options in the same space, but until then, you've got at least a little stress. quite a bit of this stream is very likely to be rehashing things we've mentioned on previous ones. Part of the reason why we do these segments in this way is directly related to that. Each character, each player has to come up with their own way, to come up with their own understanding of the situation they're in, relative to their standard playstyle. Zoning is never quite as strong in a game where the opponents can reach you very quickly. But in a game with a very heavy commitment to the approach, the opposite of Guilty Gear where you could like jump and then stop midway and a bunch of other things, you do have more options as a whole for dealing with approaching opponents. If they try to approach from too far without putting themselves into your blocking space, the space where you can force them to defend themselves and therefore get some pushback, there's going to be some problems for them, not you. For this game, this means that the biggest problem tends to be the startup on moves at different spaces. Fortunately, Hilda, as a strong zoner in this game, has decent startup for almost everything she wants to do to keep the opponent out, meaning that most of the time she's not that worried about it. She has to worry a lot more about if she misses than about an opponent getting close enough to evade her by using their own move or countering her directly. But, of course, we must discuss the difference between being evaded and missing. Missing in this case is more so misreading your opponent's intention than it is a matter of doing an attack that doesn't hit. Strong zoners tend to have a lot of space control, and Hilda is obviously no exception. In fact, she's archetypally one of the strongest there is. On top of all that, she has decently good escape tools. Meaning that keeping her pinned down is more so a matter of lockdown and rushdown than moving to the correct space. But it seems that, as has been customary for these streams, we're gonna have sort of a run with a particular single opponent. They don't mind fighting the same person, we don't either. Last time the lag got up to around 3 to 6 frames, it fluctuated a little bit. But it was 3 frames for most of it, so let's assume it's pretty good. Once the opponent is close, it's more difficult for Hilda, so you have to decide between just getting out of the way, if the opponent gives you enough space to do so, with either your backdash or her teleport, and actually trying the anti-air. So the teleport is relatively punishable if the opponent reads it, but otherwise it's fairly good. She doesn't really have a lot of problems getting away from most characters if they're not prepared for it. That is kind of hard to get away from though. One of the more important things that Hilda must worry about is the fact that unless you know exactly how to open your opponent up with certain attacks, she doesn't do a lot of damage while zoning specifically. She has some good confirms in particular spaces, but her strongest zoning attacks, in terms of the amount of space they cover, don't necessarily combo all that well. And do remember that we've discussed before in UNIst that one of the main things about the combos in the game is they can go on for really long, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're hurting. Hilda's particularly susceptible to this. She can beat up her opponent for a long time, but that doesn't necessarily mean she's going to end up doing a lot of damage. On the other hand, she does get to build up a lot of meter, and the meter in turn can lead to damage. She also has a lot of moves that can be improved in some way by holding down the button to charge them rather than immediately tapping it. Or when you really have that hard read on your opponent and you pretty are sure where they're going to be, you can get away with quite a lot. One benefit of the zoner mindset is generally not being the sort of person who believes in your fast buttons. This is useful when you're getting starting out in UNIst because so much of the game is combos that in other games would be escapable, counterable, something. But these combos, as you can see, are mostly real. If you're not familiar, you can tell how real a combo is by, rather than watching yourself get hit by the combo, watch the hit marker on your opponent's side of the screen. Each move has a certain amount of hit stun, and while that hit stun bar is white, the combo is still currently valid and you can't get out of it by basically any means, especially if you were in the air. You're looking for either when the bar disappears, or when it turns red. Fortunately, Hilda's auto combo, like most in the game, is at least fairly decent. And she is a character who gets to use it quite a lot, relatively speaking. But as we were saying before, the zoner's reaction to being hit in long combos is not the same reaction as that of the pressure player. They don't think, I should mash out of this as quickly as I possibly can and hope it works. Generally, they're thinking a bit more calculated, and even if they do mash out, because that is a decent way to get started to find out if your opponent's pressure is real, they're easier to quote-unquote discourage. They don't have the autopilot necessarily for using that as their solution. If they realize, this mashing out thing is not working, then they mostly stop. But it looks like they've switched to Carmine. I'm pretty sure this is the same person, just switched to Carmine. Carmine has a little bit harder time with Hilda, but setting up all that space on screen limits her movements quite a bit, making this a very heavily awareness-based game, similar honestly to fighting Ino in Guild Gear. So there's that. Moving around too much generally becomes dangerous, and guarding your head becomes super important. But, just as with that, good air positioning and good awareness of the opponent's location can help quite a lot. Forgive my sniffles, I'm very slightly sick, but not enough that I don't think this will work out. Stream-wise. Ooh, but a miss. On the other hand, the most relaxed kick in the world happens to win out. Guilty Gear fans would probably have thought of this character more as Zato 1, but it's not strictly speaking untrue. He does have the capacity to play like that. But if you go into the air, he's a little bit more stressed than Zato tends to be. That is a very, very Carmine thing to say. Now that we've had a decent amount of testing with the meter at full and the CPU at mid-level, time to turn it up. Oh, new important entirely. Outland versus Hilda confuses even me, because you'd think that Outland wanted to stay closer to Hilda, or at mid-screen, and that Hilda wants to be as far away from Outland as possible. But every time I've seen this matchup, which is honestly not all that many times, this doesn't seem to work out very well for either one of them. And they end up playing the opposite. Outland tends to get super close and then fight from really far away, and Hilda seems to have advantage at mid-screen. And I can't tell if that's because they're super high-level players I'm watching all the time, or if their frame data is really, really unconventional. But we're already seeing the start of it. Outland fighting from really far away, and then approaching, sticking super close. I mean, obviously it helps that she can basically keep combos going forever on Hilda without much chance of Hilda getting off the pressure directly, but it doesn't seem like enough to explain this fully.
No, I had no idea she existed.
But before we were interrupted by that match, interrupted being the weirdest way to put it, we were talking about working with less meters and with a full-strength computer opponent, which is at least a good way to get used to handling yourself in the game. And learning enough about a character to decide what that character is good at helping you learn. Even if you could easily beat them, there's usually ways to make this a little difficult for yourself, and teach yourself at the same time.
A new sacrifice comes to you.
But rematch with the Outlaw, so I get to talk about and try to understand that a little better. So if we presume that the reason this works out is because Elton's knockdowns are full screen, whereas her regular shots don't knock Hilda down, as you can see there, it might explain it if the speed is really helping out. So she can get in off the knockdown and worry less about anything else. This could also mean that it's helpful because she has that specific ability. As we mentioned often in both Guilty Gear and Street Fighter lounges, a large part of managing your fight against zoners is moving away from them first, so that you are sure when you are going in what you're doing. Eldam's ability to attack from full screen and get her knockdown and get her stuff started is quite different from most characters. Most characters, if they want the knockdown, they have to get in to get it, or whatever they use to get the knockdown from far away does not get them any pressure started. Hilda can of course catch and recover, but even then, Eldam still gets to approach, and can potentially have a fairly good advantage if she knows more or less what she's doing. Part of this has to do with the difference between the various types of zoners, something that isn't so clear if you're used to playing simpler fighting games. Zoners come in three forms. Oppression, where their hitboxes and so on are so large that trying to get around anything is just insane. The archetypal example of this being original Sagat from Street Fighter 2. You basically just block Tiger Shot for 30 seconds per round, occasionally get a jump, and hope you do as much damage as you can from that jump before you dive and chip damage. Sagat is still good at this. It generally requires fast projectiles and a method of anti-airing the opponent that tends to get them most of the time if they are trying to avoid them. But most importantly, the projectile and spacing should involve as little movement as possible. The question should always be more or less, should I move yet from the opponent's side, while the oppressive zoner is just throwing more fireballs. Possibly filling the screen with them if they can manage. And of course they tend to have the frame data to match this. Most of the time these attacks cross the screen, and that's part of their oppression. You know that they won't fall short or be in any particularly strange positions. They're going probably straight but could go up or down. The beat is what is important. Then there's the lockdown zoner. The lockdown zoner's effect is basically to continually deny you space. Exactly how this is done can come in all sorts of forms, but generally, it won't involve you actually moving anywhere per se. And for the most part, they don't want to move anywhere either. They're happy in that situation where you can't move and they can't move, and they're going to slowly chip you to death. The reason why this is different from the oppressive zoner is that they're not necessarily trying to hit you with the projectiles. The projectiles might just be a way to stop you from moving, or you will get hit. Like, somehow this is a given. If you attempt to move, you will end up being unable to block my projectile, or blocking my projectile in a way that advantages me so much that you don't benefit at all. This doesn't have to be projectiles though. And finally, the space control zoner, who may seem very similar to Lockdown, but who is perfectly willing to allow you to try to get in, and just has a ton of good options to counter any attempt you make. Hilda is this type. She does have a few options for locking you down, but most of them, if you could avoid them, which you can, as long as you probably weren't moving at the time or she hadn't gotten the knockdown and set up a very specific space, mostly it's not a foregone conclusion that if you move you will get hit. But as a reward for trading away that ability, they have better offense because they have more tricky ways of making the opponent not want to be in a particular space. Since they continually give the opponent the impression, if I just caught this right, I could get in, and then beat them terribly for trying, they can be considered a luring method, and they often have really good juggles on any strikes they do make, which is rewarding in terms of damage in ways that lockdown zoners aren't often given, and oppressive zoners are, for the sake of fairness, almost never given. Because it would be, generally, to most people's feeling, dumb to have a character who could keep on throwing fireballs at you until you got hit by one, and then juggle you until you died. It would just feel cheap. Whereas, while there are quite a few people that will probably still say that fighting zoning Hilda or Axel feels cheap, at least then you can say, okay, that was probably my fault. I moved, I left myself open in a particular way, they found the perfect button to hit, and then they juggled me for 25% health. But it is definitely true to say that if you had kept your butt quiet, that particular 25% health damage wouldn't have happened. But we can see it demonstrated here. Hilda's normal strikes, the ones that tend to just go forward and push the opponent back and do the things you expect from the oppressive zoner, don't cross the whole screen. And when she hits with them, she doesn't necessarily get a lot of stuff off them unless you are really skilled or happen to be in a really good position. She does, however, have some situations in which if you made the wrong move and she clips you, good luck for the rest of your life because it will be short. This type of zoner is often allowed to have that whole big full screen. You don't get to move at all for a moment, but my recovery for this move is huge. As you saw before. It's not even a move that most people expect you to get hit by. They just put it there so that you have to respect their position on the screen. But Cosmo has been training on almost exclusively Andir's in Street Fighter, so giving him a character who is effectively more structured in the way she attacks spaces, and therefore doesn't have to do the whole specific timing thing. Hilda does not necessarily care about waiting until you get to her to stop you from hitting her. Hilda hits you wherever you are because that's how she goes. And of course, with the expected drawback that if she misses, you're through. There's no halfway mark there. This type of zoner is actually the best at taking advantage of people's impatience, because the oppressive zoner, in order to play their game plan, they have to beat patience out of you. Or into you? Into you. You have no choice but to stay still. You have to respect the amount of stuff they can throw out at you. But in a lot of games, depending on the methods you use for absorbing this sort of thing, many games will give you an option that will let you beat oppressive zoner's tools with parries, absorbs, whatever else. This is because an oppressive zoner's strength is keeping you away from them. And for some characters, this is basically unfair. The only way they can do any damage is if they can get close to you. So you can't just allow the oppressive zoner to just throw fireballs for the entire round. Even if the game came down to there's no chip damage, you take no damage from blocking all these, the problem will still return. Eventually it will turn into a draw. And there are quite a lot of people out there who are more interested in not losing than they are specifically in winning. But chip damage has almost always been a thing in these games, meaning that the oppressive zoner gets to win at least partially by that method. But you've just seen one of the main things that matters in this game. The space control zoner can be mistimed. They can throw the button with the intention of hitting you when you approach them, and there be no approach. And you take that space and move through their defense, because they don't have enough time to dismount another. Therefore, the skills built up here aren't so much based on player patterns, but at least somewhat on staying calm in those situations. Most of the time, the best thing you can do in that situation is just block and hope that your opponent thinks it's their turn when they're wrong.
Win. Hi.
悪いんだが、今はお前と遊んでる暇はない。先を急ぐんでな。
The lockdown zoners' effects tend to be extremely fast, and leave you with basically no options for these things. But they also tend to have really long recovery. Hilda does also have a few options like this. In fact, she is one of the strongest zoners in fighting games because she tends to have all of the options available to her. Whereas most characters are sort of pigeonholed into being one type of zoner. This takes a lot of work to do in terms of game balance and so on. But in our new age of patches, extra versions, and so on, you can have a little faith in them that they've managed to get some balance done. Some matchups might feel like nightmares though.
Winner. Yaku. Second close. Divide.
So now that Cosmic Wolf has the hang of this, along with the backdashes and so on, and while he's not one of our more defensive players, he does have enough awareness to not end up like Handsome Dynasty or myself when pushed into block situations, and will most likely defend his way out. We'll see the extra parts of the match, such as guarding low more often than in most games, and backdashing in more situations. Since the space control zoner is often looking to escape to lure the opponent into attacking. One of their strongest skills as players often involves making sure that they are watching the opponent while they do their own retreat. A skill that you can build up over time. We have Street Fighter bots for it. We technically are soon going to have Dragon Ball FighterZ bots for it. You can say there's one or two that we already have. But that ability to mislead the opponent about how much distance there is between you and them is really helpful. Opponents with high accuracy, therefore, are more effective against space control zoners than they are against oppressive or lockdown zoners, because accuracy really doesn't matter if you don't get to approach. So, with no air backdashes or similar floaty trippy moves in this game, there are few characters where Hilda's zoning technique does not work as expected, and she mostly can just play out based on positioning. She can have some trouble in certain spaces with Merkava, who has long range, Seth, who actually has more approach tools and direction, and similarly Orye, although once Orye is in the air, she's a little bit easier to pin down than most people. Hilda just has to not go for so much damage. And to some extent Gordo and Wallstein because they just have so much range. But with those characters it's more so, have they managed to back Hilda to a corner to the point where she doesn't have any more options in terms of moving away from them more. Otherwise, for the most part, she gets to play the zoning game with all her tools. She doesn't have to worry about not being able to use any given type. And can adapt more so based on the player than anything else. For example, if she insisted, she could blast out her full screen attack against Eltram and cover most of Lin's approaches with all sorts of things, honestly. But here's another new opponent. And here we have the showdown of space control characters. While Phonon is somewhat oppressive, for the most part these two characters play with similar game plans. They have really long range and can put out buttons in particular spaces to get what they need. Phonon happens to have a bit more of the oppressive style zoning ability in that she can throw out the projectile and have it cross the screen, giving her a little bit of space to do what she wants. But this doesn't necessarily help her that much against Hilda, who can jump into the air to avoid it, and then launch a strong distance attack of her own on the way back down, as you've just seen. Even just a neutral jump is a threat. What it does give you though is a character who can launch the attack that punishes Hilda for missing without moving, which can be a little bit disorienting and distressing for a zoner using a lot of space control. They're used to having to watch for the opponent's movement, not the opponent's projectiles. It is also particularly helpful in Phonon's case that she doesn't have the most visible of projectiles. Like, there's a lot of things that look similar when she's moving. And while the projectile itself is fairly blatant once you're paying attention to it, if you're watching to see things like, is she approaching from the air? Is she going for her full screen low? You're not necessarily looking for that projectile at that spacing. This slowly wears down the space control zoner and makes them more likely to do their own attacks, especially long range ones, just to prevent her from throwing any at all. But the problem is that Hilda doesn't have any oppression zoning tools of her own that would actually cancel or collide with the fireball. Barely blocked. And the equivalent of an uppercut. That was 5 frames of lag, but given the matchup, it probably wasn't the deciding factor.
A new sacrifice comes to you.
So as with the usual rotation, we'll probably be fighting this opponent for a little bit.
First close, divide.
As you can see, while Hilda does have the same sort of full screen blast semi-oppressive tool, Fonon can just crouch under a ton of that. And because she has her glorious full screen low, this doesn't even mean that she can't attack. Unlike Outnum, who at least has to stand up in order to do her full screen stuff. You will therefore notice that, interestingly, Hilda spends a lot more time pushing Fonon back away from her, as if she were some sort of pressure character. But even pushing her there isn't necessarily the best thing to do. And that brings us back around to our explanations of Vorpal. Vorpal is similar to Tension in Guilty Gear, meaning that you do have difficulty building it up if you're constantly backdashing and giving up space. However, if you watch Hilda's gains in Vorpal closely, she somehow seems to manage to mostly still have Vorpal meter built up as long as she's not taking damage. This is because, one, her moves reward with a decent amount of it, and secondarily, she's able to push the opponent back enough with a lot more forced blocking than most other characters can easily put up. When the opponent is constantly approaching Hilda and she's comfortable just hitting buttons to keep them in their place, she can build up Vorpal fairly well. But against Fonon gets to advance slowly, whereas Hilda ends up retreating to stay out of the way of certain types of trouble.
A new sacrifice comes to you.
I wonder why it's setting this default top.
First close, divide.
Since Hilda does not easily manage to advance on Fonon, she has to launch more attacks than she would in other matches. And she has to launch less safe ones than a lot of other situations as well. Fortunately for her, though Fonon can in fact get stuff off of her longest strikes, this is slightly space independent. Meaning that this is one of the characters with the most susceptibility to the various orbs you see Hilda put out. As even if she attacks and manages to get the attack off, if the orb has already started to blast, she'll get interrupted mid-range.
Second close, divide.
Therefore, when Hilda gets knockdowns, the orb is generally a waste against most characters because they'll just block and wait for it to be over, or throw out something invincible and make Hilda's life miserable either way. But Fonon, despite having such options, is generally not close enough to use them without having to deal with orb fire. And then you get to see things like that. The opponent has to quickly decide where exactly on screen they want to be. during the orb firing. So let's use our quick select to switch to Phonon as the opponent, as she's a decent way to upgrade from Orient.
A new sacrifice comes to you.
Four frames, we're still probably good. The other thing, as you can see, is that Phonon slightly lacks quick response to Hilda's dive. But, in order to make this useful, as with most dive kick style moves, Hilda must be at the perfect space when launching it, so that she ends up advantaged enough to actually get the hit she wants. Fortunately, she does have some really good long buttons in the air. That can punish the opponent for trying to get out of the way of it. So in this way you can see, even though Hilda basically retreats most of the time, her length of attacks and the reward of those attacks means that she can actually keep some Vorpal up. A good part of the reason for this is that she gets to take up the space that she is creating by pushing the opponent back with her zoning if she wants it. If she's confident that the opponent is in a mental state where they are not likely to be approaching her, she can just tap forward a little bit, take her space, and the resulting Vorpal. Also, the way in which Hilda loses Vorpal when defending is a little different than some characters. Since she spends so much time doing moves, just hitting back isn't really a thing that causes Hilda to lose a lot of Vorpal meter. She doesn't get hit too much as a generality, whereas many characters lose their Vorpal for blocking too long. Hilda's generally either hitting the opponent or being hit. In comparison, anyway. Ooh, barely stepped out of that one. Dirty clip. One interesting part of the flow of this match is that the opponent only benefits generally from Hilda retreating if they also took that chance to move forward.
Win. Hilda.
I like that one.
But sometimes, moving forward
もう終わりなんだ
is exactly what Hilda wants the opponent to do. Hence the space control. Sometimes she does it on a read, and sometimes she doesn't even have to. Depending on how far away you are, she can actually see you coming and react. Depending on more or less whether or not she jumped or not. Some moves she does it by jumping and expecting you to move in a way that she can hit with one of her jumping things, and sometimes she stays on the ground and expects you to come in another way. But that's a reasonably simple decision one can make without a lot of specifics. From the CPU, we can see one of Honon's other small advantages in this match. There are definitely spaces she can get herself to that would lead an inexperienced Hilda player to think, oh, I can hit this button, and she'll be just out of range of it. This is actually really common for this character. Fortunately, it doesn't tend to be too terrifying, as she doesn't have a lot of really quick whiff punishy style normals. It's more so to just irritate you and give her options to move. That said, she's not entirely lacking them, so depending on what exactly you've done and what situation you put yourself in, you could still end up facing some big damage. It's just that in those situations, most of the time, many of the characters in this game don't extend a consistent hurt box enough that Honon can necessarily get a full combo of the more damaging kind. And regardless of anything else, while you can see a lot of hitting happening, I've always remind you that the amount of damage you take from relatively long combos in this game isn't necessarily all that high. We mention this every XL stream, but it is super important to learn and understand when playing this game. Sometimes your opponent is going to beat you up for a long time. Watch that health bar. It will help the game be much, much less intimidating. Similarly, if you find yourself trying to get in on Hilda and going, oh, she's not hitting me that often. Well, normally that's fine, but it does depend on what exactly she hits you with. Looks like our opponent has gotten a win while they were away. So now we are both at 1 win, except that theirs wasn't again. Most recently, Gold Hilda. They're playing this one a little more carefully, looking for those moments to get in. But that's not going to be so easy. As noted, you're dealing with a player whose defense is at least average. And if all they have to do is manage to defend long enough to get out of a situation against an impatient opponent, most of us can manage that. It's only full pressure that tends to be overwhelming to people.
Second close, divide,
Fortunately, we've got some good conversions from the phone on side. Instant air stuff, specifics. Looks like they've got a specific game plan in mind here. That seems to be paying off. And it's not very easily countered either. Meaning that's what we'll have to pull out a few more of Hilda's tricks in order to get anywhere in this one. However, it is true that an opponent who is relatively focused on getting in on you is susceptible to both the teleport and the dive. As soon as they're out of full screen, there's a chance that you can use this against them. But again, this being the very first time you played the game, it's a little bit harder to go, okay, I'm gonna master this dive kick in like 2 hours. That said, we can still see how it would come up and help out.
A new sacrifice comes to you.
So let's see how this flows. Adaptation-wise, it's not specifically difficult to do, but actually succeeding at it in a way that leads to victory is a different story, as this involves a lot of reading the opponent's level of patience, their invisible patience meter at any given time in the match. Once at a full screen, Hilda basically has at least some control. But at mid-screen, this situation right here, you have to make the decision, am I going for the jump dive, am I going for buttons, or am I going to teleport? And there's nothing to base that decision on. If your opponent is patient and you teleport, you're going to get hurt. If their approach is cut short and you dive, you're going to get hurt. And if you try to hit buttons and they're retreating, you're going to get hurt. Fortunately for Hilda, all of these things have decent payoff from her side. So it is more or less a half-screen mix-up. This one is a little short of footsies because footsies has a lot more to do with moving around your position in order to understand what attacks you can force your opponent into. This is more so believing that your opponent is going to do a particular thing and countering that thing immediately. They may be able to defend, but the advantage goes entirely to you if you guess right, making it a bit more like a mix-up. You can even see the somewhat rock, paper, scissors style outcomes of it, where if Hilda goes for the dive and Fonon goes for a jump, it's basically paper. They cancel each other out. Nothing really happens. If both of them just defend, again, more or less nothing happens. Even if they both hit buttons, a lot of the time it just like involves one of them getting a very tiny bit of damage on the other. And while this is obviously good, the buttons they have to hit in order to make this work, yeah.
Comes to you.
What's this now?
Huh. Guess it's dope.
Oh, well, we're gonna assume that, given that this Ori is like a high level, that the game decided to not show everyone else the situation. May I have to rely on my commentary? I'm not sure. But what we got from this side was a report that there is a blocked scene going on, and therefore it is not visible, I guess. Hopefully it will resolve itself and it does have something specific to do with this match.
Ow.
But maybe not. Are we returned now? Okay, I guess we are. So something about our last Ori opponent meant that we couldn't see it. So we won't be accepting that particular opponent in the future. Lucario, was it? But worry not, the match was not all that interesting. And a new reminder, Smart Steer, the game's auto combo. Or as we initially called it, for terrible joking reasons, the Fawns. Hit A repeatedly to combo. This move is generally not that strong. Certain characters obviously have better auto combos than others. depending on how you land your initial hit, it may be fairly suboptimal, and because most of the time you've started the combo from a light attack, it's probably scaled fairly heavily. That said, if you're not doing anything else with your meter and have control of the match otherwise, throwing on your extra 500 damage? Depends on the move. Can be good for getting a little extra. But if you're specifically thinking about it in terms of using meter, obviously recognize that the last part only happens if you actually use the meter, and if you use the meter, no. If you use said meter, then obviously no longer have it. It can matter in certain matchups though, where you really just need the little bits of damage, and otherwise have good control. Alright then, let's see if we can get this one and it will not decide that. No warnings, so it looks like we're going through. Appears to be a relatively high rank Gordo. But basic understanding of the flow indicates that Gordo normally has to defend at least a certain amount of time against Hilda. Good patience helps out a lot, but going up against a beginner who is, by nature of being his owner, relatively patient themselves and therefore not likely to just throw out moves randomly, the match should at least be good, even if it is likely to be a bit overwhelming from his wolf side. The opponent is guarding fairly often. It's not clear if it's because they expect randomness or because that's just how they've learned to play this matchup. But at the moment, it's looking decent. So the question is really, how fast can they take off Hilda's health once they manage to get started? Still, we're still getting to see most of the intended and important aspects of the game. Even if once the combo starts, it's a little bit messy. Similarly, Oswolf understands that against a character like Gordo, who tends to be slower, they're less likely, for the sake of fairness, to even have good wake-up pressure, and mashing out may be a good idea. At least some of the time. You can see even that the opponent backdashed and was ready for the mash out on that. But as with all our Sandbag casuals, the question is more so about how much damage you can learn to take without getting discouraged, and what little you can manage to learn even in matches where most of the time you're just taking damage after being opened up. This is another reason why it's so important not to spend too much time focusing on jamming out of combos or whatever. If you find yourself getting hit and ending up in a combo when you're first starting out this game, you can probably immediately stop thinking about how do I get out of the pressure that comes from this? Just assume that the round is over. Or that you can mash all makeup or something and hope that you catch your opponent off guard. But focus your thought on, how did I get here? What caused me to get hit enough that I now have to take this whole combo? As that's often far more important than what you will do once the combo is over. As any skilled opponent will most likely recreate the same situation. And you will just die the same way again. It's easy to forget in the middle of being pummeled by Phonon's juggles or something that the entire reason you got hit by this and got into this juggle is because you jumped at the wrong time, or didn't guard your legs enough, or went for a move that you shouldn't have gone for. This sort of thing can often make fighting games difficult to learn as a whole, but can be really stressful in UNIst in particular. Using the system can be similar to what we do with bots. Bots are a matter of counting and paying attention, therefore, to how often you succeed at a particular thing. Intentionally shifting your focus from, am I doing enough damage, to am I doing the thing in question correctly. But you can apply this in reverse against an opponent. If you keep on making the same mistake, you can count up the number of points that your opponent has gotten by capitalizing on that mistake, forcing you to focus not so much on the fact that you're getting hit, but what it is you did to cause you to get hit. While keeping track of the number of times you make a particular mistake can be discouraging if you autopilot a lot and tend to do it regardless of anything else, if you can restrain yourself, it can be a little more helpful. As the consistent awareness that I keep on hitting this button and then I keep on dying, and this has happened like 9 times in the last 9 minutes, it's usually way more than that. But at least make you more aware of something you shouldn't be doing, and at least explore the options to see, well, what happens if I just don't do that? A lot of the time you may still get hit, but perhaps in a way that is more useful to you in some way. But it looks like this has mostly turned out well. We'll probably give it another 10 minutes or so, depending on whether or not the matches slow down. And this isn't absolutely the first time, period, that Zolf has ever touched the game. He played it a little earlier, like literally a couple hours ago, for like 30 minutes. But at that time, understanding yourself well in games allows you to make the decisions fairly quickly with either a little analytical help or someone else's understanding of the characters. Because you basically got to, okay, you probably play either Hilda or Gordeau. You started with Gordeau, and after like 10 minutes of watching Hilda do things, went, nope, she's the one. And appears to be doing quite well for himself as a result. Which is pretty good for someone who probably doesn't even know how to throw in this game. But it does work out a little bit better for zoners and space control people, as it's less important that you know the direct specifics of your combos. A lot of zoning skills carry over from game to game, as long as you understand which of the 3 types of zoner you prefer to play, and obviously which character is that type if they're available. Taking proper advantage of these situations is something that the average zoner player does better when they're just starting out, because they need to then go and run into the gamut of players who have developed methods to get around their basic zoning techniques, forcing them to come up with more creative ones. We do generally recommend this game, especially if you were a fan of certain games of a certain era. The internet will gladly tell you all about how if you are a fan of Street Fighter 4, this is the game for you. We were not fans of Street Fighter 4, but most of the things this game doesn't have that was relative to Street Fighter were the things we didn't like. So, and one more run through a potentially new opponent. Maybe a couple matches with them to close this out. Yuzuria! This is technically an oppressive zoner character, meaning that for the most part Hilda has an easier time in one specific way. Once you can get Yuzu far enough away from her, anything Yuzu wants to do damage can be hurt. The obvious 2 problems in there are getting her far away from you, because she does not like to be there. Despite her strong ability to attack from over there, she doesn't really want to be there. And secondarily, the fact that she can attack from over there. Most players are used to the idea that if you face a zoner, you face a different character and they run away from you. As a zoner, you should take the space. We talk about this in Guilty Gear Lounge all the time. Against an oppressive zoner like Yuzu, you don't want to take the space in general. You're going to want to assume that she's going to try to attack from wherever she is, similar to Phonon, and relatively slowly. So most of the time you just want to throw out your biggest attack and hope that she does in fact do something. If you're wrong, you might get clipped, but you're going to get clipped if you didn't do anything, so you might as well.
派手にやってくれるじゃない。心意気は買う。
zoners do run into the problem from the other side, therefore. In a completely new game situation like this one, knowing every character well enough to go, okay, I'm starting from this game plan, or quickly analyzing them to do the quote-unquote correct thing, a lot of people really enjoy it. But it is possible to be the type of player who likes zoners without specifically enjoying all of the thinking that goes with it. But, fortunately, most zoning strategies and most understanding of characters is worked out fairly early by those sorts of players. The cerebral type zoner that likes to think about all the little ways that they can prevent this thing happening in this matchup and so on. And then you can go read it. Which is, of course, super useful. In this case, he's relying on just me. And even if I do understand a lot of things about Hilda, which I technically don't, in terms of specifics of her moves, the amount of time to transfer that information is unlikely to be enough to really help. But let's roll with the assumption that we are in fact going to be seeing that Yuzuri Habalera in a little bit for the final match of the night. And work on how do you deal with this? Well, since we can't be sure that the CPU is going to play anything like any given player, and is mostly only good for showing you, hey, this character does these moves and has this range. It's not going to help a lot because that Yuzu player more or less demonstrated most of her ranges, even if not all of her moves. Therefore, Hilda's big problem is, how do I attack that spot on the screen before you can hit me? She can obviously use, as you've just seen, the full screen blast, but this is relatively slow and allows the opponent to approach in particular ways. Yuzuri does also have some stances that would get her out of it. This is therefore the opponent where Hilda's charge moves tend to have the biggest effect, or rather her hold button moves. These are technically still considered charge moves, but... As with a lot of retreating characters, when the opponent has decided to move away from you in order to set something up, if you can react to their movement by starting an attack that you know will cover your space, you can trick them into believing that you have made a mistake, that you have done an attack that is going to recover at the timing and spacing that they get to launch theirs. And of course, if they hesitate because they aren't sure, you've achieved your goal anyway, they're not attacking you. And you have something akin to the previously mentioned mix-ups. Except more tactical because now it is closer to footsies. Just full screen footsies, which is what we mentioned about this game a lot. Hilda does also have some lateral air attacks though, where she can jump into the air and do either long forward blasts or even diagonal downward ones. And if any of these land, she can cancel into floating orb and similar. So, let's close out our stream with one more look at Yuzu. The player is on an 8-win streak anyway, but we might get to see a little bit of change or a little bit of difference. There's basically no lag in this match, so it isn't likely to come up to be a problem with that.
こうはまるで聞いてなかった。もったいない。差しなさい、差しなさい。
And there's the other part of it that would obviously come in. Yuzu's stances do of course help her a little bit against Hilda, but it's a matter of very carefully watching and understanding. Is my opponent approaching or retreating? Because that's all you really need to track. It's super hard to do if you're not used to the feelings involved. But that's the key. If they're retreating, there's a specific type of attack you use, and if they're advancing, you do what you normally do. Fortunately, for them, Yuzu does actually have decent pressure, meaning that if you stick to her, well, if she sticks to you, you kind of have to care. And they were ready for that. So it looks like it helped a little bit, but that level, that part of zoning, is a lot more work to figure out. Well, the lady said it. So with that, we've come to the end of our stream for tonight. This has been Rillian along with Cosmic Wolf, having our, well, his first experience with Under Night in Birth. It's not likely that this is going to be one of his main games anytime too soon, but he probably enjoyed showing off Hilda's power. So with that, Team 2MK bids you good luck with your training, and good night everyone.